Let's do it.
Welcome to Vikings Happy Hour, where we mix our favorite beverage and talk of your Minnesota Vikings.
The bar is open. Welcome back to another week of Vikings Happy Hour, and we are stoked to have Matthew Coller from Purple Insider joining us this evening to talk all things Vikings. Matt, how are you? Thank you for carving out a little bit of your time for us this evening. Oh no, we got some audio issues, Dave. Can you fix it there?
No, it's not on my end. I just heard him.
Well,
20 seconds ago. Now he's frozen.
Well, we'll toss it over to Ryan then. Ryan, how are you doing?
Doing great. Got to help coach some youth football just right before coming here. And if you've ever coached youth football, you know you definitely need a beer after. So I think that this is a welcomed conversation. I got my daddy's honey pot from Angry Inch in Lakeville. So, excited to be here and talk some football.
Yeah, absolutely. I switched over.
Nope.
My best friend got me on a vodka water kick, which is surprisingly good, but I feel weird drinking it. But it is tasty. Myles, happy you could join us this evening. How are you?
Hello. What's up, guys? You guys hear me?
Thank you.
Yeah,
We
yes,
can
sir.
hear you loud and clear.
You look
Okay, cool.
tired.
Yeah. What's that?
I said you look exhausted.
Yeah, I mean, I got you rushing me, Dave. I mean, yeah, of course I'm tired.
Cracking the whip, of course. Matthew,
back.
can
I don't
you
have
hear
anything.
us?
I don't have anything to drink besides I have a San Pellegrino and water, like a regular water. I don't really have anything else. I got the night shift tonight, so.
Oh, I still can't hear Matt. Sorry, everybody, for these difficulties, but we'll get it fixed out. I guess just to kind of start off while we get the technical side of things figured out, Ryan, I just want to hear kind of what your takeaways were from last week's game. I think that it's a little bit of concern. We haven't quite scored a touchdown yet on offense, but we'll get to that later. I want to hear Matt Coller's take on that. But kind of tell me what your takeaways were from last week's preseason game.
Yeah, watching the game, I was actually there live again. I was able to
I'm gonna
take my
pause
son
you.
and
I just want to see if we can hear Matt now that he's back.
absolutely.
How about now, guys?
Yes,
Perfect.
we were golden.
Okay.
We're going to rewind that question back. We're going to fire off the question. Matthew, thank you for joining us from Purple Insider. Another busy day at TCO Performance Center. How are you?
I am doing okay. Sorry about the delays. I couldn't get my computer hooked up to it, but we're on the phone now, so we're good. And, hey, it's been an eventful preseason and training camp, hasn't it? I mean, normally we get sort of the most mundane press conferences following practices and following preseason games, but we've had a lot of entertainment and a lot of things to talk about. So I'm doing good.
Yeah, I mean, Kirk's presser, I don't know if he was trying to build his rapport back up with the media members out there, but I heard him giving Chris Thomason, I think, was talking about his outfits that he would wear a little bit. So he's trying to get in the good graces maybe a little bit.
That's been an ongoing thing. With Chris has got all sorts of different hats and shirts from the places that he travels. Usually there's time in the off season where Chris will pick a different country and travel there and visit, and he'll always pick up something along the way. So I think it wasn't even recently that Kirk noticed this. I mean, this was probably a year or two ago that he noticed this and started asking Chris about the different hats and shirts. So today, I guess Kirk couldn't figure out what country it was that was represented on Chris's hat. So I guess they left the stream on so everyone saw that. But that has sort of been an ongoing dialogue for, I don't know, quite some time.
We got a little insight to what it's like to be a little beat reporter because, yeah, they did leave that stream on a little bit longer today. You mentioned how weird training camp has kind of been this year coming off a COVID-19 season. Have things settled down a little bit, or are they still pretty chaotic over there?
No, I think they have. I mean, when you think about the first couple of weeks, even you start with, Christian Darrisaw not being able to get on the field, Rick Dennison, I'm not going in order here, but Rick Dennison being reassigned because he decided he didn't want to get vaccinated. And then you have Kirk Cousins missing practice, and you have Jeff Gladney being indicted. I mean, all of these things were happening sort of like day after day. And Mike Zimmer giving his multiple press conferences addressing the players who had not been vaccinated yet. And so we were just kind of being hit with wave after wave. And then, things start to settle down. We get the first preseason game. They have the Broncos wipe the floor with them, which normally is sort of, okay, well, look, it's a preseason game. And yes, it is emblematic of how thin the roster is past the starters, but normally you would just sort of shrug that off and you would have the coach downplay it and say, you guys worry too much about the preseason. It's not a big deal. But then, Zimmer took the exact opposite angle. And so when Zimmer comes out and says, no, this is actually a huge deal, then we have to react accordingly and say, okay, I guess this is a big deal. So that kind of stoked the flames again. But I feel like over the last, not that it was a much better performance for the offense against Indianapolis, but it's mostly been what's going on with Anthony Barr and his injury. Will we see D.D. Westbrook anytime soon? Will we see Christian Darrisaw anytime soon? And then, who's getting cut? And now we get to the sort of more normal things. Although I would say that Zimmer talking extensively about Mike Osterholm coming in to visit them and talk about more about the vaccine sort of gave us a window into the fact that they're not over it, that they have so many players that remain unvaccinated.
And this is all before week 1. Add in there that Everson Griffen is back on that.
Sorry, I missed that last part of what you said.
Oh yeah, Everson Griffen's back. I just want to know what your thoughts were on that to kind of top the end of training camp here.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, well, I think first of all, it tells you that Kirk Cousins' opinions on anything don't matter. I mean, because even if they talk something else, I mean, bringing in a guy who tweeted the things that Everson did about your quarterback would just be a non-starter, I think, if you had a true franchise quarterback. If it's Russell Wilson, Ben Roethlisberger, Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, Brett Favre, like that's just not something that would be considered. I think you'd just look for a different pass rusher to bring in if it was going to make the quarterback look bad. But in this case, I think what we see is that the organization, the head coach, the management, they're looking at Cousins as if this might be his last year. And all the signs point to that, from whether it's, talking about him in press conferences or even who they bring in. Now, from the perspective of the roster, I think that Everson Griffen is an upgrade over what they had. Even if he is a situational player, I suspect that he won't remain like that for that long. Maybe he's a situational player for a couple weeks and then he'll be back to starting because he's just better than Stephen Weatherly or DJ Wanham. At the same time, you have to look back to the draft. You have to look back to free agency and go, what happened there? I mean, why was this position left the way that it was, knowing that Danielle Hunter was coming back from a major injury and knowing that you have this position that didn't create a whole lot of pressure from last year. The guy who was the best at creating pressure from that spot last year, Fadi Adenabo, now plays for the New York Giants. So there's a lot of sort of questions to be asked. And Everson wanted to come back months ago. Why did they wait this long to finally pull that trigger and bring him in? Were they thinking that they wanted to see if Wanham or Weatherly had another gear to them, and then they maybe underestimated that they don't? I'm not really sure, but I think it sort of says that there's a few positions here where they maybe overlooked as they were getting the roster set. Another one you might say is backup quarterback. If Greg Joseph misses a few more kicks, we'll say you overlooked the kicker. Backup linebacker, maybe another tight end. Now with Tyler Conklin hurt, it sort of reveals that there's not much there beyond him. So they're sort of scrambling to fill these spots at the very end. And you have to say that Everson Griffen was the best option to do that just from a pure player perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, Matt, so my name's Ryan. I don't know if we've actually met. I just want to say quick, I appreciate your, everything that you bring to Vikings Twitter and to the content that you provide for about the Vikings. I appreciate the real approach. I think we here at Climb in the Pocket try to provide that as well, not the just super rainbows and sunshines optimism that some of the fans have. I think we try to keep it real. And in that light, again, I appreciate that. So in that light, obviously we've had a lot of offensive concerns so far in the preseason. Again, you take it for what they're worth, but we have a new offensive coordinator. We haven't scored a touchdown in the preseason. Again, it's preseason, so whatever. But you still haven't seen any explosion out of those kind of second gear guys. We invest heavy in the draft and offensive line. Neither one of those guys are starting. Talk to me a little bit about that. I mean, are you concerned, overly concerned? What's the feeling amongst the internal team, right? Because you maybe have a little more insight there. Talk to me a little bit about the offensive concerns right now.
Yeah, first, I really appreciate the kind words. And I would say that I never would blame anyone for wanting to be optimistic about their team. I think that there is a section of fans who wants to be very aggressive about that and fight anyone who's on the realistic side. And I try not to take that too personally. But to your question about the offense, where it connects to what we've seen in the preseason and even in 3 drives is it just hasn't really looked like they've been locked in. There have been other years where I've covered training camp. 2017 comes to mind, where Sam Bradford was dialed in with the offense, and he was dropping dimes to Stephon Diggs, Jarius Wright, and Adam Thielen all camp long. And I think that if I remember, the preseason games were ugly, but we all went, "Oh, who cares?" I mean, they look really good in training camp, right? So it doesn't matter. Ultimately that offense turns out to be really good, even with Case Keenum running it. And also we saw Case Keenum show up in those preseason games with his job on the line and really stand out. So we haven't seen that from the backup quarterbacks this year, but we've seen what you guys saw and everybody saw with the preseason game against Colts is kind of how the offense has looked in practice, where it just seems like Cousins is not locked in with his receivers. Now, Thielen was out there. Justin Jefferson wasn't. That's a massive factor. Of course it is that the best receiver is not out on the field. Still, it was a lot of throwing to running backs and throwing short underneath and everything. And I think it is like a concern. It's not such a massive concern that I would say they can't have a good offense this year. But you look around at what's happened this year and you say, well, how dialed in is Kirk? How distracted is Kirk by the things that have happened? How sort of engaged is he in being this team's quarterback after they've done a lot of things over the last, even going back to drafting Kellen Mond the last few months, that would sort of suggest you're not really our guy. So, the last time he was in a situation like this was in 2017, and that was his worst year in Washington. So from that angle, you do worry. But then when you think, well, Dalvin wasn't out there and Jefferson wasn't out there, those are two of the best football players in the entire league. So I would say, yes, be concerned that it hasn't looked really locked in training camp at any point, and he missed time, which I think set him back. But I wouldn't say, look, guys, season over, they're going to be the 28th best offense. Like, no, they have way too much talent to be a bad offense, but there's a lot of questions here along the offensive line. Clint Kubiak calling plays for the first time. And so I think that last year, they had some numbers that were put up when they were losing, but they also had some very, very good games and very good runs. But they were also very healthy for the most part as well. And so you're kind of going through this weighing back and forth. You have a ton of talent, but you're playing a former 6th-round tackle at guard. And, there's sort of it swings back and forth. And what usually happens with that is you end up with an offense that's in the middle of the league, which is kind of where you would probably guess they'll be right now.
Yeah, Coller, you'd mentioned about Kirk Cousins and him being a little off, and maybe it's some of the distractions for himself. Do you think with the new COVID protocols and those things that the NFL has put in place for non-vaccinated players that maybe there's an impact to Kirk? Because we know how much of a, like, I don't even know how to, the right word here, but Kirk is very much that type of person that has to be on like a strict schedule. Like, his life is just a schedule. Do we see that as being a factor this season? We know last year, how COVID impacted the entire NFL, but they all were under the same umbrella. They all had to do the same things. Kind of felt like you could find your own groove. But with vaccinated and unvaccinated players this year, it feels like everyone's a little bit different. Like, you even heard it. You could hear it in the way Kirk was saying it with the small meeting room that they had with the quarterbacks. Like, you could just hear the tension there. Like, do you think that could be throwing him off? And like, something I've been thinking about just and how Kirk is like mentally, that could be throwing him off this offseason so far.
And that's a really hard one to say, because I'm sure he wouldn't acknowledge that if that were an issue. And I think that most of the things that they're doing with masks on in meeting rooms and things like that there's not like this huge difference on a day-to-day basis what would be happening vaccinated or unvaccinated, aside from the mask wearing, the daily testing, wearing a tracker and things like that. At the same time, I think that the tension part that you mentioned could absolutely factor in. I mean, you think about just how thin the margins are in the NFL of having success and not having success, a great play and not a great play. It's very small. And so you've put a guy in a position, rightfully or wrongfully, deserved or not deserved, to feel like he's kind of under attack from his own team. And, after he does that press conference, I think all of us probably wrote the same thing, like, wow, that did not go very well. I mean, that was not what anybody wanted to hear that's a Vikings fan from him. I mean, I was even thinking of, people who don't want to take the vaccination want their quarterback to play, right? Like, I think when you hear the way that he talked at the podium, it really struck the wrong chords. And I think everyone in the organization felt that way from people that I've talked to. And so, when you feel like the head coach is calling you out, then people behind the scenes are upset with you for your decision. And also, every one of these guys who doesn't get vaccinated, they call it like a very personal decision. And, never really had that quite explained to me, like what they mean by that. But it's clear that it's something that means something to them. And so you imagine feeling like you're sort of being attacked from all angles. And then your top wide receiver gets banged up in practice and you don't have him. And Danielle Hunter's rushing at you every day. Like, there isn't really room for distractions like that. And I think that that's what it is. It's like that term distractions can be overrated in football. These guys are great at putting on the horse blinders, but there's only so much of that you can block out from a day-to-day basis. And, even at the stadium, like, Kirk has got to have ears, right? Like, the other night they announced his name and nobody cheers. And it's just like, I mean, like, again, deserved or not, right or wrong, these are not circumstances that you would want your franchise quarterback to be playing under. If I said, here, this guy's going to be your quarterback for the next 10 years, would you want the coach undermining him at the podium? Would you want people behind the scenes pushing him as hard as they can to get vaccinated, to the point where they're bringing in experts from the University of Minnesota to tell you that your personal decision is very wrong? And then you go out, and then you go out there and have to play the best in the world. So I think that all those things have factored in. Now, in the past, Kirk Cousins has been very good at being criticized and blocking that out. After that Chicago game where he was being ripped by everyone for apologizing to Adam Thielen, he came out and played great against the Giants. So I've seen him do it a bunch of times. Again, I wouldn't write off the offense because of it, but I think that is at the center of why they've had some issues. And what we haven't seen, and maybe this will be up to Jefferson and Cook, is we haven't seen the team really feel like they've rallied around him in any way or been defensive of him in any way. And so I think it's going to be up to the star players to just kind of carry this thing and make it a good offense.
Money's on the line, so I'm sure Kirk will say something, do something to find a way to get paid again. Money's on the line.
Yep.
I don't doubt that Kirk will get paid again, but I have a question for Matt. If this season goes south quick, do you have any senses that Zimmer is actually on the hot seat? Or do you think, given everything that's happened just within this training camp with Kirk and his unvaccinated star players, I think it's rumored that Thielen, Harrison Smith, Dalvin Cook, whatever, if for some reason these guys miss games and cause them to lose games, does that save Zimmer for another shot at 2022?
Yeah, not rumored on Dalvin Cook or Adam Thielen or Harrison Smith. Those guys are not vaccinated because they're still wearing masks when they're not playing, and that tells us everything we need to know with that. And those guys by far aren't the only ones. Like, there are numerous other players, whether starters or the second level backup players, who are unvaccinated and might end up being a difference maker. After they cut down to 53, I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking more like 60% of the roster as opposed to the 70 that was put out there. But to your point, I think it's a bottom line type of season. I'm not. I mean, okay, so if Kirk Cousins missed half the year because he got COVID or something, maybe we'd be talking about a different scenario. But let's say that he doesn't, and I do believe that Cousins behind the scenes is doing everything he can to avoid getting COVID and missing football games. I do believe that. Whether it's motivated by money or not, I don't know. But I mean, you want to be on the field. He's always been on the field. He was not, he didn't miss any games last year. So let's just say that's all fine and that they don't have a COVID outbreak and miss a bunch of things. Either that or not that, or they do have a big COVID outbreak. I mean, I think, like, whatever the scenario is, that the excuses have basically gone off the table. If it's one game that they miss of a star player or a couple games, I mean, is that enough to say, okay, Mike, an 8-9 season is fine? Like, probably not, right? And they also made their bed with this backup quarterback situation. If there's nobody who can play, if Cousins is out, anything that happens with those players, you can always tie it back into, well, didn't you guys as a collective, Zimmer, Spielman, didn't you make these decisions that got us to this place? So if it was just a 1 year type of thing, then you could say, yeah, well, bad breaks. But I think last year was bad breaks. Or at least they want to believe that. Like, we lost a lot of the defensive players, they would say. We didn't have fans, they would say, things like that. Okay, that's fine. But I don't think you get 2 years in a row in the NFL of excuses. I think they'll give you a pass on 1 year, and that's pretty much it. So I kind of waffled a little bit. But I think that save for Cousins misses most of the season with COVID or something, or an injury, I think that the win-loss record is the bottom line for everybody. And if it's less than 500, you just have a tough time seeing them running back the same group again. Whether it's one of them and not the others, I don't know. But I think that there's a lot of pressure, especially with the amount of investment into the defense for kind of push everything to the middle of the table. I think that's huge for ownership of how much money they had to spend to work around the cap too. When you think about all that, adding void years isn't a freebie. It costs money. Like redoing contracts costs ownership money. So I think they're going to say, we gave you everything you needed, now win. And I think that's pretty fair.
Well, and to that point, Matt, all of the 1 year deals that they have, all of the chips being pushed in because of the void years and those things are all about right now. Because you could tell in the offseason there are going to be a lot of different decisions to make on Kirk Cousins, on potentially Adam Thielen, some other players. They still got Brian O'Neill and Harrison Smith who need extensions, those types of things. So there's a lot up in the air where it feels like this is the season where it's make or break. So if they were to start 1-5 again, there's no way that you could see them run it back for a third time, well, a ninth time at that point. But there's no way at that point. And one point I wanted to bring up with you, Coller, is that you talked about Mike Zimmer and a little bit of the stuff he said. We kind of hear him in his press conferences. There's a little bit of subtle jabs at Rick Spielman, and maybe you would know a little bit better, but just kind of trying to collect information for myself and from people I know, is it just feels like there's some tension there with a disconnect between what they're trying to do and what they want to do from an overall standpoint. And you have Zimmer kind of taking shots at Rick from the first round pick standpoint, and the draft picks not hitting in some of those cases and that stuff. And so maybe you could touch on that a little bit.
Sure. I think what happens with Mike Zimmer, we've seen this a few times, is that when he gets backed into a corner, he's going to fight to the death, right? I mean, this was kind of like 2018, where Zimmer feels it all coming apart, and he feels the pressure coming down on him, and he fires John DeFilippo. And the same thing went for 2016, where they start 5-0, and there's the pressure of, oh, hey, you're an early Super Bowl contender at 5-0. And then 2 weeks later, your offensive coordinator is walking away for his job, and everything seems to be coming apart at the seams. And I think even that was Mike Zimmer going, what is going on? We're losing games now, and everything's sort of falling apart. And seeing the writing on the wall in 2016, I really felt that from him. And he had other things going on, his eyeball and so forth. But there was just this feeling of him sort of overreacting to a loss or two and feeling a little panicked. And I think there's somewhat of that this year, where he's looking at the roster and he's going, we got a lot of great players. We could easily be in the playoffs. We could win playoff games, but here's my unvaccinated quarterback, and he's scared about that. And here's my first round draft pick that was supposed to solidify my line. He's not solidifying my line. Here's the second level of my roster that if you go down one level from the linebacker position, from the safety position, from the wide receiver position, what do you get? Offensive line, same thing. You get a lot of missed draft picks. And, I've always been of the belief that there's a ton of luck involved in drafting, and it's very hard to say, hey, this GM's great at drafting, this GM is bad at drafting. But, I think we are seeing some separation there, and I wonder if just teams with, different types of approaches are having more success. And there are things to question with some of these draft picks. I think Jeff Gladney, maybe some of us question that right off the beginning. Not that it drafting a corner wasn't a good idea, but there were some other prospects there that you went, well, maybe it's a little safer play. Certainly, Garrett Bradbury was a questionable pick. If you're taking a center in the first round, the guy better be a monster, not someone who's being pushed around every day in practice by Michael Pierce. And then you have a draft pick who gets indicted and cut. You have another draft pick who's hurt, who's playing in Kansas City now. You just and some of this stuff is bad luck. Some of it might have been foreseeable, but you also hope to hit on guys in the later rounds that can fill roles, and they don't even have that. Like Jalen Holmes might get cut. They've talked up other guys that they've drafted. Oh, he's lanky. He's just like Danielle Hunter. And then they're having to cut guys all the time for those reasons. So, I think what Zimmer is probably trying to sort of lay the foundation of, I'm a great football coach, but I was given 5 straight drafts that produced absolutely nobody past the second round. And from that perspective, do we disagree? I think that he's got a point there, though usually you don't hear that point made in public, but I think it was sort of not that subtly made after that first preseason game.
But when he handpicks the cornerbacks, he gets no excuses from me. Zero. He's the one handpicking the cornerbacks that he wants. It's not like he's telling Rick exactly who he wants there, but that's a different conversation. But yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate that insight.
Before we keep going, I want to be cognizant of your time, Matt. So if you need to hop off, just let us know. But if you're still good, I'm sure we could throw questions at you all night.
Yeah, I can hang for another 10 minutes, then I got to run to do another podcast. But fire
awesome.
away.
I appreciate
for
that.
Sure.
Ryan, go ahead.
I want to give some of our commenters a little bit of love here, or just some attention here, because we have great comments in here. Appreciate all the people watching live with us here. One of the comments, and then I'm going to bring up another comment here. Ethical individualist, states that Kirk Cousins haters needs to be held accountable when he's gone and the next QB really sucks. And to kind of address that, Mary, who's always with us every show, Monday through Thursday. I appreciate you, Mary. She comments back, I don't hate Kirk Cousins. Just want him to be held accountable and do what he's paid to do. We all want him to just win, not just win games, but playoffs and hopefully a Super Bowl. So, and I think that's a sentiment. I think a lot of us, including you, Coller, get knocked for being a Kirk Cousins hater. And we don't hate Kirk Cousins. I don't hate Kirk Cousins. I think he's a very good quarterback. But I do think that he's paid at an amount that he needs to be able to cover up some of the deficiencies that we get in the event that players do get hurt. In the event, like Patrick Mahomes, right? His offensive line was completely garbage, and he took that team to the Super Bowl. And obviously it fell apart in the Super Bowl, but nevertheless, he got them there. And again, we all know Kirk Cousins isn't going to be Patrick Mahomes, but we do need him to play at a higher rate and worth the money that we're paying him. Can you maybe just comment a little bit on that type of comment and your feelings? Because again, I think you are labeled as a Kirk Cousins hater, just given what I see on Twitter. And I don't think that's fair, because a lot of people don't hate him. We just want him to do what he's paid to do at the rate that he's paid to do it at.
Well, stop making excuses.
From my perspective, I've never hated any player that I cover. I just cover them through the lens of what your team's expectations are and what you're supposed to achieve based on how much you're paid, what your circumstances are, and all those other things, what they brought you here for when it comes to Kirk Cousins. The thing is, no one ever would, it's just funny about Cousins in particular. No one would ever label me a Jalen Holmes hater, but I just told you guys that Jalen Holmes hasn't done anything since they've drafted him. It's I guess I just
starting
picked
now,
names out of a
I'll
hat.
start calling you that.
Yeah, it's weird. I picked the names out of a hat, and they just so happen to be the guys that underachieve that I hate. But it's but that's how you do it for everything journalistically and objectively. Is you look at all the evidence and you say, well, what does this tell me? And that goes from trying to decide whether Brian O'Neill deserves a contract extension to whether Kirk Cousins was a success or failure in Minnesota. When they signed Kirk Cousins in 2018, let's not rewrite history. They signed him to win the Super Bowl. And not only did they not win the Super Bowl, which is fine and happens, it's happened to this franchise with way better teams and better quarterback performances than his. It happened to Fran Tarkenton. He's a way better quarterback than Kirk Cousins. But look, they win 8-7-1. And then they win a playoff game, and it was a great game for Cousins. But then the next week he throws for 130 yards in San Francisco, and they lose. And so you're 3 years in. You've won the division exactly 0 times. You have one playoff win when you were the 6th seed. And when we talk about Cousins, they didn't bring him here for quarterback rating. They brought him here to win games. They paid him to win games. And so I get that there's an evaluation of Cousins to say, well, look, he could have had this or he could have had that. That all ties into his money, by the way. And it also ignores a lot of things, like he's 6-0 against the Lions and 19-21-1 against everybody else. That they've beaten exactly 3 winning teams since Cousins was brought here. The New York Jets have beaten 4 since 2018. I mean, they have not achieved as a team with Kirk Cousins as their quarterback what they set out to achieve. And is 100% of that on Kirk Cousins? No. But I think we have to say it hasn't been a success. So you can like him, you can cheer for him, you can believe that he's a very good quarterback, and I wouldn't argue with any of those points. But if they're going to make this a success, it has to go along with taking your football team somewhere. Because when you go around the rest of the league and you go, well, let's see, Russell Wilson's team was a disaster last year and they went 12-4. So how much is the quarterback connected to your winning? Like, well, if they're $30 million worth, then usually it's a lot. I think we all would have paid Patrick Mahomes, right? So I think it's a very nuanced type of thing. But I think that anytime we're talking about the Cousins thing, I think there's a lot of people that really want to see him succeed because they like him and they think he's good and they think that the team could have done more for him, which may be true along the offensive line and some of their spending. And so of course you should feel that way about your team's quarterback, that you want to see him succeed. But that's not my job, is to hope and root for something. My job is to tell you the sort of black and white of it. And that's the realities, is that they brought him here to win and they haven't. Now they've got one more year to do it. But the other part is too, that I get a lot of my information from just listening to how other people talk. And when the head coach of the football team, who has had this long career and been around thousands of football players in his life, is standing at the podium undermining his quarterback, you can't look at that and say, oh, that's fine. No, nothing to see here. Like, come on. I mean, you can't. When you bring in Everson Griffen after what he tweeted, you can't say it's fine, they must all love him, right? And so I have to tell you that. And if it was different, then I would tell you different. With Teddy Bridgewater, it's different. With Teddy Bridgewater, you couldn't find a person on or off the record who didn't want to play for that guy. And now you see him convincing another team of that. Is he as talented as Cousins? Of course not. But they want to play for him. And so that's part of the equation too. So I think that what I try to do is cover the whole thing. And I may have just covered the entire thing with that answer, but it's always, it's like a thing we do now, I guess. If someone sort of lays out what the facts of the matter are and you don't like it, you just make up your own facts, which we see a lot of that on Twitter and stuff. So I guess that's just how it goes. That's our world today. But I'll change my opinion when the facts change. So if Kirk Cousins leads them to the NFC Championship, then I'll say this was a success because you reached where you set out to go.
That's about the best mic drop you can get.
It was. That was legit.
I feel hesitant to ask you one final question because that was just so good of a rant.
Brooks Sponge.
I just want to clip it. But I am going to ask you one final question before you go, Matt. As cut down day is coming up next week, do you have any surprise cuts that we could potentially see? And then on top of that, before you log off, I want to thank you again for hopping on. I know you're super busy. I know training camp covering the Vikings is chaotic as usual, but we here at Climbing the Pocket love your work. Appreciate the objectiveness and in the hard facts that you give us. And thank you.
Well, thanks so much, guys, for having me on and always being very supportive of what I've done. Really, I mean, for a lot of you guys, just even since I moved here from Buffalo in 2016, I've gotten to meet you, Myles, before. I haven't met Ryan or Matt, but would love to sometime if we get a chance. COVID things always get in the way, but now maybe sometime we can meet up. But I really appreciate all the support from you guys. And look, I mean, there's so much fighting and stuff on Twitter that it sort of becomes your universe in a way, right? Of where you get your sense for how people view things and feel about things. But I don't think it's always the best view of like reality of how the majority really feels. I think that there's some people who are so loud about certain topics, and this goes for everything, that it can sort of skew what we think. And I think the vast majority of Vikings fans that I've found are really interested in just all the football stuff and
Dozier's
knowing the
not
truth
getting
about
cut,
their
Flip.
team. Right? Like this is not a fan base that necessarily needs you to pat it on the head. A lot of people do, but I don't know why, because the Vikings fans that I've gotten to know are like, what's going to go wrong next? It's almost like they're more comfortable with you telling them what's going to go wrong than saying that it's going to work out. So that's anyway. Surprise cut. Is it a surprise if I say it and then it happens? Then you won't be surprised. But I mean, I don't know. Stephen Weatherly came to mind here. I mean, you're bringing back Everson Griffen. But then Janarius Robinson goes on IR, so that kind of opens up the spot for Griffen. He's the one I thought of. At one point in camp, I thought maybe Armon Watts, but definitely not now. I think that he's solidified himself. I thought he played well against Indianapolis, and they just don't have a whole lot of depth at that position. Is Dakota Dozier a surprise cut? I don't know.
No, he doesn't. No, so Coller, Dozier's not getting cut. I feel like it's like inevitable at this point. If they were more comfortable, it's just my opinion. I feel like on Friday we're going to see Dozier play left guard with the second unit, and we're going to see Wyatt Davis play right guard with the second unit because Drew Samia is out. So like, I just feel like they view Dozier as too stable, and even though we know he sucks, but. And then I say James Lynch. James Lynch is my surprise cut, by the way.
Okay,
you didn't ask me.
I guess I wasn't sure whether that was or not if James Lynch got cut. I mean, a fourth rounder from last year, but trying to switch positions for the third time in 3 years, this is a thing the Vikings love trying to do. It's usually a last-ditch effort, though. Is like, can the guy be a nose tackle? Like, you sort of see that a lot. So, yeah, this one, I was trying really hard when we were making up our 53s, myself and Sam Ekstrom, to come up with some unique ones that I was like, could Chris Boyd be out? And then the next game, Chris Boyd's out there with the starters. Like, I guess not. So, I mean, I guess the most shocking one would be if they cut Cam Dantzler. That would be really shocking.
But you know that's not happening. Like, there's a 0% chance that's happening.
Yep.
They'd trade him before they cut him.
Right. So trying to find a surprise cut is like, well, who would be a little surprising, but also not totally shocking? And I don't know. I don't know if this roster has too many super surprise cuts that are coming. But every year there seems to be one.
I agree with you.
Chad
where can
Beebe
people
might be a surprise at this point.
I know people can find you on Twitter. I don't know the link to your website offhand. I know you do because you say it every podcast. So let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, sure. The Purple Insider podcast, just wherever you get your podcast, and purpleinsider.substack.com. But I like to mention that I also bought purpleinsider.football because it was available. And so that will take you to the site as well. So if you can't remember the Substack part, just purpleinsider.football. It'll get you there.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Matthew. Ryan, Myles, hang on. We can continue this conversation for, I don't know, another 15, 20 minutes, and we'll call it a wrap then. So thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Coller.
Yep. Thanks so much for having me, guys. Take care.
See ya. Ryan, I think that your mic has been muted for probably the last 15 minutes.
No wonder. I was like, man, I'm trying to talk and Matt just won't let me jump in here.
Right. There's one, I saw someone has been asking about Darrisaw, looking for a Darrisaw.
Darrisaw and Barr.
And Barr, I feel like is one it's almost impossible to know at this point. Darrisaw feels like this is a hypothetical situation I could see happen. We know with the IR situation now, you can't the Vikings couldn't put Darrisaw on IR right now and then have him come back in 3 weeks. They have to wait until the 53-man cut down. So I think it's like after next Tuesday or Wednesday, I think they could do that. This is a hypothetical. I wouldn't be surprised just to make sure that they sit him for a few more weeks to get him 100%. I could see the Vikings putting Darrisaw on IR. Obviously, it's a 3-game IR instead of half a season or the full season that it used to be. I could see the Vikings doing that with Darrisaw. This isn't me saying I have any inside info. I don't on this, but that wouldn't surprise me. They worked out Roderick Johnson. I played for the Texans. He's a swing tackle. Today, I wouldn't be surprised if they signed him and then put Darrisaw on IR next week, just because they want to make sure he's 100% healthy rather than try to rush him back. Again, that's just a situation. That's a guess, but something that I could see happening.
And you're not limited weeks now anymore, right? It's just, or is it?
I think it is like 2-3 weeks.
Okay,
It's at least 3 games. I think that's what it is.
3 games. Okay,
and then you have then you have a window because if you had a bye week, I don't think that counts.
Sure.
But early in the season,
that's a negative. Myles, they changed it. They kept the practice squad rules from last year, and the one thing they did change was IR. They can come off at just about any time, and you don't have to designate anybody to come off.
Oh, so it's not a 3-week minimum anymore?
Nope.
Is it unlimited? Unlimited amount of players?
Yes, unlimited.
Perfect. So then I wonder
Dave,
if we see that with Barr then too, if it is truly.
I'm still seeing 3 games, but it's a minimum of 3 games. There's just no limit.
That may be it, but there's no limit on how many people you can put on and how many people you can put off, and there's no more designation.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, and then I saw that Freddie is asked a couple times for a Barr update. I was listening to Dan Barrero earlier today. Randomly, I never drive anymore, but I happened to be in the car and listening to him because I enjoy him. And he was talking to, I think, Kevin Seifert, and they were basically saying that mum's the word on Barr. There's nothing, no update. I don't think any reporter, beat reporter, anyone has any information on Barr. They're being pretty tight-lipped with it. So, with the history of last year happening with Danielle Hunter and calling that what did they call it? What's the terminology they use?
Just a tweak, man.
A tweak. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little bit more, right, in terms of hopefully not a season-ending thing, but something that is going to hold them out for a game or two. And so obviously, we all as Minnesota fans, we noticed that Kamal Martin got cut. That'd be a great pickup. I think he's a capable linebacker that played relatively well as a rookie.
Claim today?
I don't think so. I haven't seen anything. I could be wrong. I didn't see anything though. So that's again, I'm not an insider, Freddie. I can't give you very specifics as if that is the accurate truth. If anyone else has any other inside information, that's just coming from an NFL insider, Kevin Seifert. On Barr. So notice that Flip said cut Drew Samia. I wouldn't be mad. Obviously he's an Oklahoma player. I want Oklahoma players on the team, but I wouldn't be mad if he got cut. He did not play well in his first live action, but it seemed like he was playing better this year. Again, he's also another individual that is somewhat nicked up or hurt, undisclosed in terms of what we know about the injury. So we don't really know what's happening. He could be another person that could go on to IR. He's technically still eligible for the practice squad. So he would be able to jump on there. So I don't know if he's going to be cut. I'd be surprised if they did, just given how well he played in that Denver preseason game. But if they did, I wouldn't be mad because he wasn't great when he had the chance last year. So he kind of burned the bridge there. And then last thing I want to mention, I think I was on mute, so I couldn't mention it when Coller was on, but he had mentioned about Kirk and how he got no standing ovation when they announced his name. Well, I was at that game, and that is accurate. He didn't. Teddy, when he was here in Denver, that crowd. I mean, again, the crowd didn't erupt like crazy, but he got a pretty loud ovation for Teddy, and it just goes to show the impact of the likability factor of what you can do for a fan base and whatnot. So I just found that funny. I wanted to get his take on that, but I missed that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think he alluded to the fact that on or off record, nobody will
Thanks,
say a
Freddie.
bad thing about Teddy. Um, See you later, Freddie. One thing I want to ask you guys before we do wrap up is any takeaways from what Coller said. I mean, he was pretty objective, pretty blunt in his responses, which is kind of a breath of fresh air when we're talking about the Vikings. I know sometimes we don't always get to hear the truth or what goes on behind the scenes, and you can only read so much. But to actually hear
Appreciate that, Freddie.
him vocalize kind of his thoughts about Zimmer, Kirk, the offense, the defense, the depth, everything. What are your guys' takes on that?
Pretty spot on in my
Go ahead,
opinion. I
Myles.
mean, yeah, I think Caller hit it on the head of kind of what we've been hearing and seeing through Twitter and through the beat reporters, through training camp. Like normally like in like the 2016 season, even the 2017, 2019 seasons, there was a different kind of buzz around those seasons where you felt a lot more confidence. Now I think that's what makes this season so weird is like you look at the Vikings roster, you look at the starters, just the high level, just look at the starters, don't look anywhere else in the Vikings roster. And you're like, that's a pretty damn good team. But you're not hearing that kind of play coming through during training camp. Like during the Denver Bronco practices, like there's a reason the Vikings they didn't play 31 of their players against the Broncos. They had the two practices to see what they needed to. They got kind of their like the quote unquote like live game reps against the Broncos in those situations. So they didn't need to play them during the game. But you didn't hear much from like the offense. And I think that's the troublesome part of it is am I like super worried about the offense? No. But at the same time, you want to hear a little bit more consistency from your offense. When you hear a little bit more just overall like buzz around them. Like, yes, we know Justin Jefferson as an individual is a really good player. Same with Adam Thielen, Irv Smith having a good preseason. That's one guy that you're like, okay, there's buzz around him. You like hearing that, but you're not really hearing that like overall. And that's kind of the part that's bothering me a little bit. And so am I, like I said, I'm not like completely worried about it. I just would like to, obviously come out on, was it September 12th against the Bengals and put that to rest. Obviously that's the ideal situation. But yeah, I think overall just kind of what Coller said, he hit the nail on the head. I mean, it feels just like a lot of tension. And I think it's showing up. You hope that ends in, once the preseason's over, you hope as they roll into the season, those distractions, those things are kind of put behind them. The only concern you have, in my opinion, is you fear that a COVID situation happens. And that just becomes another one of those, like, well, we told you this was going to happen type of thing. And that's just what you hope doesn't happen. Like, and, that's why they want people to get vaccinated, yada, yada. But, that's just that's the scare, in my opinion, that's coming is like, you just don't want that. Because I feel like that just would potentially crumble the season. You want to have a strong, deep run. You want to have it. This team, I've said this before, shouldn't just be a fringe playoff team. This should be a top 6 or a top 4, top 5, team in the NFC. They shouldn't be a fringe, sneak into the playoffs type of team. They should be a team that solidifies themselves and make a deep playoff run. I mean, they should. We shouldn't accept anything less.
Absolutely.
Well,
And, to kind of go into some of the comments again, Flip had mentioned winning solves everything. And Myles kind of started to allude to that. If we come in and we, beat the crap out of the Bengals and we handle Kyler Murray and the Cardinals and then we go into our first home game and take care of Russ, hey, we just beat two really damn good quarterbacks, right? Like, Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson. And then we got Baker Mayfield coming in after that, who in his own right is pretty darn good as well. So, if we can come in and win a few of those games and start even 3-1 or 4-0, I think a lot of this like uneasy feeling is going to get put to rest, like Myles was saying. Going back to your question, Matt, around Coller and kind of the takeaways, I really appreciated that kind of, obviously it wasn't his walk off, but that last question around Kirk Cousins haters and what he needs to provide to the team and the realistic expectations, because I think a lot of us are misconstrued as to being haters. And it's not being haters. We have proper expectations put in place. Like Mary has mentioned in the comments here, all we want is wins. And I know that's not all on Kirk, but when you are the quarterback of this team and you're the leader of the team and you're not doing things to put your team in the best possible position. I mean, I look around the league and again, COVID or not COVID, let's take that out of the equation because again, if you want to have that personal choice, whatever, that's your business. I look around the league and I see all these quarterbacks getting together with their receivers. I'm not saying Kirk isn't. I don't hear about it though, right? Like, where is the camaraderie coming from? Where is the chemistry? Where is the leadership? I don't see it. And again, I'm not saying it's not there because I'm not an insider. I don't know. But I want to see whether it's fake or not. I want to see like that being posted. I want to hear more about that. I know it happened early on when he joined the team like in 2018, but I haven't seen anything about that since. I haven't seen him kind of going above and beyond. Like Myles said, he just seems to be this regimented guy that follows his schedule and doesn't stray away from it. And that is indicative of his life, but it's also his play on the field. And I'm kind of sick of it. Like, I want a quarterback that is going to go above and beyond, that is going to put in the extra effort, that truly wants to be here and win. And part of Everson Griffen, I mean, obviously he said what he said. He might have been ramped up. It might have been a mental health thing. I'm not sure what it was because it did seem out of character for Everson Griffen, but there's some truth into what he said. And if he's thinking that, if he was a player that said that, he's not the only one that's saying it, or not the only one thinking it, I should say. And I think that's where the issues come in. I think for me as a fan, and again, not being a Kirk hater, because I think he's a very good quarterback. I think he is accurate as hell. He can throw a great deep ball. He makes relatively good decisions for the most part. Obviously, he doesn't have the best pocket presence or whatever, but for the most part, he's a good quarterback. But there's some of those intangibles and that leadership qualities that you want out of your franchise. Again, we talked about this over the last couple of weeks. Your franchise quarterback that he doesn't have or he hasn't shown.
Well, and real quick, the Griffen situation that I don't think anyone's talking about, maybe they've mentioned it. It's clear the Vikings didn't go to Kirk Cousins while they were in conversations with Griffen to ask how he felt about this. They don't give a shit how he felt about this. They were making this decision based on what they wanted to do. Because like we've talked about in most franchise quarterbacks, had this happened to them from a former player and that same player was looking to come back to the team, it would have been off the table. Or they would have at least had a conversation with that quarterback before they made the decision. It's clear that the Vikings didn't, because if they had, Everson Griffen would have already had a conversation with Kirk Cousins and had that the apology and all that stuff before he signed. That didn't happen. So it's clear that they didn't address that situation before they made the decision to bring Everson Griffen back. So that in itself should tell you kind of where things lie with him. I'm not trying to make this again, I apologize to everybody because I don't want to make this about like a Kirk bash, a Kirk situation like that, because I'm not trying to do that. It's just kind of indicative of what we're seeing and how we want to see this team move forward, though. And we want to see this team win. And so I think, who was it? Somebody mentioned it on the show earlier today. You want to see some people rally around the team and Kirk Cousins. And we want to see that. I want to see it. I want to hear it. I want to hear that like optimism. And we're just not hearing that yet. So hopefully as we ramp up into week one, we start to hear that a little bit more.
Yeah. And Flip makes a good point here, too, in the comments that we do need to admit that Kirk's not the only one that needs to be held accountable here. I mean, we do have Dalvin Cook, which, again, he's played relatively well, especially last year. But, he needs to make sure he's staying healthy. Thielen needs to make sure he's staying healthy. Hunter, again, obviously was out last year. He needs to, make sure he's holding his weight and lifting up that defense. Kendricks, obviously, I don't know how much more he can do outside of staying healthy, but he's had a, hell of a run with the Vikings.
Smith.
Barr, Harrison Smith. I mean, all these guys, these are all leaders on the team. So it's not all just on Kirk. I get that. But as a quarterback, you do need to take that ownership a bit more. Again, and this is just me personally, when I hear Tom Brady, talk about a loss, I don't ever hear him talking about the other players on the team. He's talking about himself, right? Taking that ownership, knows that the team needs to rally around him. And if he's not up to snuff, then it's his fault, not the team's fault, right? And you just don't hear that with Kirk. And again, and maybe that's got the guys miffed a little bit. And that's why people like Everson are willing to say he's ass, even though he might not be. He's just, whatever the comment might be. But anyway, just a quick thought. But, Flip, good point there, honestly.
Yeah. And I think this passion comes from, we're all invested, at varying different degrees. Obviously, the players are financially invested and have a little bit different motivations than we do, but we've been rooting for this team for a long time. And to Coller's point earlier, Kirk was brought in to win a Super Bowl. End of story. That's what it was. He hasn't done it. He hasn't produced enough wins. You can talk about garbage time stats. You can talk about QBR, whatever. This isn't fantasy. We're playing for the real thing in the NFL, and that's the Super Bowl. So I get this passion. I agree with it all. Flip's list, the only one I don't agree with really are Kendricks and Smith. I feel like they've done a really good job.
I'd say Hunter too.
And Hunter too, yep, outside of last year. But that's injuries. It is what it is. With that being said, we're approaching an hour. We can carry some of this into next week if you guys want. But I do want to thank you both for hopping on tonight. I want to thank everybody in the chat. You guys were firing it off. I appreciate it. You being in there, and I'm sorry that we couldn't get to more of them. Make sure to like, subscribe, so you can see us back here next week, where we're switching from Purple Insider, Matthew Coller, over to Score North. We've got Phil Mackey next week. So that'll be fun to chat with him right before the season starts. And Dave, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Flip is back tomorrow night with Vikings Hot Takes.
Viking Hot Takes is back tomorrow night. We have Eric Thompson from the Daily Norseman as usual. But for Flip, there is a special guest standing in, isn't there, Myles?
Yeah, I'll be making my debut. Man, I'm excited.
But we have Viking Hot Takes tomorrow. Woohoo!
Let's go.
Those guys get a free pass, Flip, because they played up to their level. Like they did everything they could to play up to their level. Pay wise, talent wise, ability wise, they did their job.
I already did my outro.
The same way a quarterback does.
And with that being said,
outro.
Thank you for watching
too.
and listening. Until next week, SKOL Vikes.
SKOL Vikings!
Let's go!
Thank you for watching or listening. As always, if you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. And if you're listening to the podcast, please rate us on your favorite aggregator. SKOL, everybody.